Okay, so good afternoon. I'm going to do like two short presentations. The first one is the one that was scheduled for 4 p.m. about the toolkit. I had presented this toolkit at least a couple of times, like different tools and different updates. So mostly what I will do in this presentation, I will talk about three tools, specific tools that have been included in the latest version of the toolkit. I think that I haven't done like a formal release for 1 or 2 years. So in the meantime, there were lots of bugs that were fixed. There were also like small features that were added to different tools. But I'm going to focus on the the stuff that I've never presented before, and that are, let's say, brand new tools if you want. Okay, let's see. So this is stuff that I presented at the last Troopers, but this is like a recall as an introduction to the stuff that we're going to see next. You know that one thing when you think about doing network reconnaissance in IPv6, for the most part, I mean, you can do some address scans, but you need to rely on other techniques because, of course, like the brute force scans, they don't work as they used to work in the IPv4 world. So at the time, last year, I was working on a project to do kind of like an internet-wide scan, measuring different kind of things, not just security. And one of the things that I was interested in was to have the domain names for different kinds of sites, like DNS servers, web servers, and so on. So the idea was, how could I possibly, obtain a list of those domain names? In particular, because obviously when it comes to websites, it's not just the address that matters, but also, the name, the domain name. So at the time, I was evaluating different ways to obtain domain names. I mean, some are not mentioned here, like, DNS reverse enumeration, which you probably heard about it already. So I took a look at search engines, which obviously we all know. And obviously, this keyword that, when you use Google or any other search engine, you can use to restrict the search results to a specific domain name. So I started to look at different search engines. First one that I looked at was Google. And lazy as usual, I downloaded like the source HTML of the Google search engine, and it's the source is obfuscated, so it's not easy to scrap it. Probably you can, of course, but it's not straightforward to scrap the the HTML. So I started to look at other search engines. Many I didn't know about, like Tioma. Tioma, for example, was another one that the source wasn't obfuscated, but they did have some. There we go. They did have some controls, such as, for example, I mean, Google does the same. That when you send like queries like too frequently, essentially they ban you. So while I was working on a script, I ran the script a couple of times, and my IP address was banned for like about 2 days. So that wasn't that useful for what what I was looking for. So eventually, I ended up using Bing, which I had never used it. But the interesting thing was that the source wasn't obfuscated, and apparently they didn't do like any kind of controls regarding how many queries you do per amount of time. So that was what I was looking for. Essentially, I did a tool that just scraps the the results from their web page. One of the let's say one of the tricky parts is how do you get different results, Because if you think about, just using the search engine with a web interface, and if you type something like, site navi.mil, well, for this specific domain, there are not going to be that many results. But if you, for example, if you were searching for .com sites, well, going through all the millions of sites that you have out there is going to be difficult, because, the search engine starts giving you, lots of results for the same pages. So it's not easy to go through all the different domain names. At the time, what I did was like a very quick trick that worked a little bit, like not only specifying the domain name, but if in the search field you specify things like, just letters, some random letters, it's you're actually able to modify the search results. It's like if in the search box, not only you put, let's say, the domain name that you're trying to search, but just a letter like A, B, C. Obviously, that reorders the way in which the search engine gives you results, and somehow you'd get some of them, but not as many as I wanted. So what I did more recently was include dictionaries. So essentially, I incorporated in the toolkit like dictionaries for different languages. So the idea is that you can feed the tool with the appropriate dictionary. So, well, in this case, it would be websites in English. So you feed the tool with dictionary in English, and you can actually get lots of results. Wait, what is this? So this is just the tool feeding the search engine with different, and here it probably just is feeding the first word and just going through lots of pages. So obviously what the tool does is when it realizes that with the same keyword, it's not getting new results, it switches to the next one. Now, if you have like 60K words, you can actually get a lot of different results. Obviously, depending on the website, some keywords are not going to help much, but you do get a lot. Now, there was a problem with this, is that it would seem to me that while Bing doesn't really ban you when you are sending many queries, it's not that the IP address is banned like it happens with other search engines like Google or Tioma. When I try to run like let's say multiple instances of the tools at the same time, let's say 3 at the same time, the number of results would go down a lot. Like there was some kind of like rate limiting for that. Okay, so you wouldn't get banned, but you'd get like rate limited. So what I was doing while I was building databases for essentially all of the domain zones that I knew, I was using different VPSs so that I could run the instances on different places. Okay, first I did it with before, but obviously since in before normally you have a single address, that wasn't of a lot of help. Then what I did was I run the tool from a dual stack host. Then at least you had maybe a couple of IPv6 addresses and one IPv4 address. So you had a few more instances, but still not as many as I would like. So the point there was that it wasn't a limitation of the, let's say, the bandwidth or the processing resources, but actually like there was a kind of limit on the number of results per second that you'd get per IP address, okay? Now, the nice thing if you want, with IPv6 is that in principle, the number of addresses is not a problem. It's not a problem. Like if you are on a /64, you can, take as many as you want. The only problem with that was that if you try to, let's say, configure your system without any specific tool, you cannot really leverage the number of addresses. Let's put things this way. Let's say that you configure temporary addresses on your system, okay? Normally, the addresses are, first of all, there's only one preferred address at any given point in time. So yeah, the addresses are changing, but you only prefer once at a time. That means that at the end of the day, you only have one address, okay? Another thing that you could think about would be to limit the preferred lifetime for the addresses. So you could say, okay, well, if these queries, are very short, I could set the preferred lifetime of an address to, let's say, 10 seconds, and every 10 seconds, I generate a new address, okay? Now, at least the systems on which I tried that, they have like a hard-coded lower limit for the preferred lifetime. So if, for example, in Linux, you try to set the preferred lifetime to, let's say, 1 minute, you're not going to be able to do that. So the minimum was something, I don't remember, but let's say it was something like 30 minutes, which, again, wasn't enough. That wouldn't allow me to, to run many instances at the same time. So what I did was use, let's say, a concept that I had already discussed in the internet draft that I mentioned in the previous presentation when I was talking about addresses. The concept of like throwaway addresses, meaning that you have a lot of addresses, so you don't need to stick to one. And obviously, since you cannot rely on your system to actually, generate the addresses at this point in time, there's no API for that. So there's no way an application, for example, can request the operating system to generate an address for itself. It's not possible. So you have to, let's say, manually do it by yourself, okay? There is ongoing discussion at the IETF to do something along those lines, like to produce some sort of API. So if you have an application, the application could say, okay, please, generate an address for me that I want to use, and then I will let you know when I'm done with the address and you should remove it from the system. That obviously is useful. It comes at the price, of course, but it's something that will be quite useful. If you think, for example, about privacy, particularly when, let's say, when we talk about web surfing, it would be, interesting if you could, for example, at least for every domain name that you visit, to use a completely different address. So from that perspective, I mean, obviously you are using the same prefix and so on, but at least it's not even the same address, okay? But again, there's no API for that. So there's some talk to do something along those lines, but still not there. So what I did is essentially augment, if you want, the tool that I had before with an extra option. So this is the same as before. So you just are using a search engine. You are scrapping the results from the search engine, and you're using a dictionary as before. And the additional thing that I incorporated in the tool was the ability to generate addresses and remove addresses just for the purpose of the tool. Okay, so you run the tool is not going to use the addresses that are configured already in the system, but will create a tool, create an address, use the address, and then remove it. Now, if you were an admin, for example, and you try to enforce, let's say, any sort of rate limiting, for example, in before, normally if you do rate limiting, you do it on a per IPv4 address, okay? That's what you normally do. In v6, of course, it doesn't make sense because, if you have a user, connected on a network where there are like, it's a /64, if you were just to ban a single address, he could just move from one address to another. So changing just the, the lowest 64 bits wouldn't be of a lot of use. But you have probably used and tried Tunnel Broker from Hurricane Electric. and you can get a /48 from them for free, okay? So that means that you don't need to stick to a /64, just get a /48, which is free, and then you can essentially use any address from that /64, not sticking to a specific, a specific network. So let's see. So this is some system that I have around. This is, how I'm running the tool. I mean, the only interesting bit is here, this last option is what, is the new part that specifies, the interface that I will use, the interface on which I will add the new addresses, and what's the prefix that I will use, okay? So this is just, the tunnel interface. So it's not like a real interface. If you go like this.
Well, you have the 64 tunnel up and running on your notebook.
Well, and not on this one. I'm doing SSH with a computer that I control. But yeah, it's the tunnel is running there. So if you do, this is because, well, I probably am running some tool here, but this is the tunnel endpoint address, okay? So normally you have an address that you have to assign to the tunnel endpoint, and then you have the prefix that Hurricane Electric is delegating to you. So the prefix that they are delegating to me, it's this one that I had here. Oops. This one, okay? So I can put for example, the tune to run here, looking for, let's say, domain names from Colombia. Okay, the other one is, what the fuck is this? So I can put, this is another instance of the tool on the same machine, okay? Now the point is that if you check the, oops. If you check the config of the tool, now you'll see that there are extra addresses. This is the /48, which obviously is the same, but starting from these bytes, you see that it's different. So each of the instances that I'm running are coming from a different /64, okay? So this is the prefix that Hurricane Electric is delegating to me, and this is, so to speak, the subnet bits. Now on the same interface, I have this subnet, I have this subnet, and if I were to run more instances of the tool, obviously I will get different ones. Now, from an external point of view, that looks like users from complete different networks. At least it's not the same /64. And in that case, you don't have any limits at all. Like I could run another one. Wait. So the thing is, before doing this, normally I could run, let's say, 3 instances, but no more than that. I mean, obviously I don't know the details of what they are doing to limit the number of queries, but if I was running more than 3 instances, I wouldn't get more results. So I had to switch, I had to have like multiple systems to be able to be scrapping results at the same time. Now, let's say if they were doing the rate limiting on a per /64 basis, then that would mean that at least I would have 65K possibilities of instances that I could run for the 65K different subnet IDs. which simplify things quite a lot. The idea, of course, was to, let's say, be able not to have to need to be running, several BPSs to be able to do this, for many different reasons. So now I can, run all the instances on the same machine and, without any problem. So actually, this worked, and it's still working quite well. There are two things I didn't show it here, but the tool has two possible ways in which you can run it. The first one, you just specify like the domain name and just keep changing the words, okay? So you will start getting different results. Now, if for some reason you wanted to do like a more exhaustive search, what the tool can do is, let's say that you got as a result some domain name that ended with navi.mil, then the tool starts walking the domain names towards this side so that it can search within specific subdomains, okay? Let's put things in a different way. Let's say that I was just searching for .com. So in that case, I would be getting results for any .com site. And probably it would be hard to, for example, if, I don't know, I was searching for Siemens.com, it would be hard to get all of the results within Siemens because there are so many .coms out there that you're not going to get them. But if once you get, for example, Siemens.com, now you change the command that you send to the search engine and you specify that the site now has to be Siemens.com, now you're searching specifically on that domain name. Then probably you're going to get more results for that zone. And you can get inner and inner into the domain name until you walk the whole space as a tree. Of course, that takes more time. So I keep the tools running in both ways. On one hand, without getting so deep into the domain names, so that I get quick results for the whole space, but also keep the tools digging into specific domain names to get as many domain names as possible. Okay. Another thing related with why it's not possible to rely on the operating system for this is that normally there is a limit. Most systems have a limit regarding the number of addresses that they will automatically configure. So I don't remember exactly, but at some point, I don't remember if it was Windows or Linux, they had a limit of about 16 addresses, Linux. So if you were to rely on automatic configuration, you'd hit the limit, okay? Whereas in this case, you can, add the addresses as you wish. Another, tool, if you want, that that is quite useful. I don't know if you ever heard about Certificate Transparency Framework. This is something that, the short version of it is that, you have the PKI that, relies on certificates, and of course, the whole web PKI essentially relies on the trust on the certificate authorities, okay? Any certificate authority could essentially issue certificates for any domain name. And there were, known cases in which some certificate authorities ended up issuing certificates that they shouldn't have. These are two of them, but there were more, okay? And maybe there were others that happened, but they were not noticed. So in theory, in response to this, Google started with this effort, which is called the Certificate Transparency Framework, which then they took to the IETF, but it was Google that started it, which the idea is kind of like this. Technical details aside, the idea is that they want all of the certificates that are issued to be logged in some sort of public log that anybody can consult. Okay, so the idea is that if you have a certificate for the domain name, if you want me to trust that certificate, well, there has to be a public record whenever it's issued. Okay. In that way, if everybody that issues a certificate is forced to actually log that certificate on a public log, that means that at least in theory, it's possible to audit, the certificates that are issued over time. Essentially, this framework has 3 components: the certificate logs, monitors, and auditors. Essentially, certificate logs, that's the obvious. Normally, it's CAs that they essentially record on the certificate logs, the certificates that they issue. I mean, there are a lot of details out there, but that's not interesting from, for the purpose of this presentation. And in theory, I mean, not right now. I think that right now it's only enforced on extended validation certificates, but not on the, let's say, the domain name validated certificates like Let's Encrypt. But eventually, the idea is that certificate transparency is going to be enforced on all certificates, meaning that if I am let's say, a web browser, and I visit your site and you send me a certificate, I can check if the issuance of those certificates are being logged, and if they are not, I can, let's say, reject the certificate. Second component is monitors. The idea is that, for example, if you are the owner of a domain name and you are interested that no other party actually issues fake certificates for your domain name, you'd probably want to monitor these certificate logs, to check if there was some certificate that was, issued that shouldn't have been there. And the last bit is the auditors, which is a functionality that is normally implemented on the browser, which is essentially about, checking if a certificate that you got is being, logged, and if it's not, you can make the decision whether to, accept or reject it. Now, what doesn't matter for us? I mean, the details of the framework doesn't matter. It's just an introduction. But the whole point is that these logs for the certificate transparency framework are essentially a centralized log where the domain names for each SSL-enabled site is present there. So if there is a site that is SSL-enabled, well, they will have the domain name recorded on the certificate transparency framework logs, okay? The interesting bit is that there are interfaces to search these certificate logs, and they support wildcards. So it's not that you can just search for one specific domain name and check if there is a certificate, but you could say, for example, I want to search for anything that ends up with whatever. You can try this site. That's a web interface for searching. Let's see. Whoops. Whatever. CRT-SH. Oh, mil. Sorry? Ah, Navi not. Yeah, like this. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but I mean, for the purpose of scanning, you don't care about the certificate itself. But yeah, I mean, it's taken some time because there are many results. But at the same time, we can do it here without so much. in the background, here's the results that you get for navi.mil. Of course, the only thing that the tool does is just scrap the same website so that it prints out the domain names in a way that you can use them in scripts. But the tool doesn't do much except getting rid of the HTML that is not useful when you're scripting. But you get lots. Okay. Well, the same applies. In some cases, you can, for specific countries, you can download like a complete subzone. Like I think in my country I tried with edu.ar or something like that, and you get the complete zone, like all the domain names that are SSL enabled for that particular zone. Now, the only limit that I have found with this is that, of course, what you probably try to do is, okay, just specify the root zone and get everything, right? I mean, or specify .com and you get, with a wildcard and you get everything that is, under a .com. But apparently, this search interface has some limits on the number of results that it will allow. I mean, normally you up to, I think, like several 100,000 is okay. But if you try to download a complete zone that probably is in the order of 1 million of domain names, it will not work. So the workaround that I found for that is that you can do something like this. First, you use the previous tool that I was employing before. So a tool that uses a search engine, okay? Just to get domain names. Let's say, for example, that you were interested in getting the, let's say, entire .com zone, entire. Anything that is SSL enabled under .com, which obviously it would be like lots of sites. What you could do, first you use the other tool, and you start to get lots of .com domain names. And then, instead of using this tool for .com, you use it for each blah blah.com site, okay? So don't try to get everything at once, but actually try to get the results in pieces. Like, for example, if you wanted to get, let's say in my country that we have .edu.ar, .mil.ar, and so on, instead of trying to get .ar altogether, you search for edu.ar, mil.ar, com.ar, and so on. And if you are partitioning, the data that you are requesting, you are able to avoid the limits that the tool is enforcing. In order to be able to do that automatically, I did a small script that, or you can use the tool in this way. For example, first this bit of the tool just searches for domain names that end with .gov. So you'd get anything, like anything that ends with .gov. Then the next tool here, it says that I want to essentially separate domain names that have two labels, okay? So if there is like, I don't know, like Trump.whitehouse.gov and there is Obama.whitehouse.gov, well, we are interested in whitehouse.gov, okay? If we are, looking at the domain names of two labels, okay? Why do we want to do that? Because if we try to get the complete zone at the same time, we wouldn't be able to. But if we fraction, if we split the complete zone in different parts, then we would be able to. Now, what would you do, for example, if this was still too big? Well, you could do like 3 labels. So if using just the 2 labels, that still shields too many results, then you group the domain names with 3 labels. So eventually you reduce the search space so much that the tool is already okay to actually give you the results that you want. Let's see. Oh. Okay, so for example, now I'm searching for just gov, okay? So I get like domain names from any zone. If I were to compose this command like this, I think it was. You see, you get like just the first two labels. And of course, the tool removes the duplicates, okay? So if when you use the search engine, there are many results for something that ends up with this, then it's going to remove those. Now that you have this, you can pipe to so this means first we search for anything that ends with gov, then we just try to group the domain names with two labels, and then we feed that to the certificate transparency framework. I'll keep it running in the background. It should. Or it could be the case that it's still, the zone is too large, so I could do it with 3. Well, I'll keep that running, and then I will go back to the command. But you get the idea, okay? So essentially, we start with a search engine. We use the search engine to get subzones of the domain name that we are interested in, and then we use the certificate transparency framework to essentially get domain names that are SSL enabled. Obviously, let's say certificate transparency framework it's a complement to the results that you get from the search engine. They are totally different things. For example, there could be on one hand, normally the results or the domain names that you will learn from let's say any search engine are from, let's say, services that are indexable, okay? So it could be some FTP site, it could be a website, but you're not going to get, for example, domain names that correspond to mail servers because they are not indexed. But on the other hand, in the certificate transparency framework, it's just certificates for anything. So if it's a domain name that corresponds to a mail server, you're going to find it in the certificate transparency framework, but not on the search engine. So it's complementary. There's another thing. It could be the case, for example, that some site has issued certificates for some server that maybe it's not always running, or that they are planning to run in the future, but not right now, or for some reason it's not indexed. So you'll not be able to find it on the search engine, but you'll be able to find it in the certificate transparency framework. Another way to put it is that when you employ certificates for your own systems, certain certificates that have been issued by a public CA, like a CA that issues certificate for everyone, well, that means that the names of the systems that you are using eventually are leaked out, okay? Because the certificates have to be published. And then the last part was a tool that, in the last year, when this part is especially for you, I had mentioned this tool, and based on what Eno said about Maradona, you might wonder why the tool is called Messi and not Maradona. Reason is that it's heresy to call a tool Maradona, so we don't use the name for that. Essentially, the idea was, I produced this tool last year when we were playing the World Cup, hoping that Messi would bring the cup, and we didn't, so I didn't care about the tool anymore. So there we go. So what does this tool do? Essentially, what I try to do in this tool is try to put many of these techniques together, okay? So that somehow you just call the tool, you execute the tool, and the tool somehow mixes the results for yourself, okay? Because, if you think about it, you have things like, the certificate transparency framework on one hand, you have search engines on another hand, you have things like DNS reverse enumeration on another, which are all separate bits, okay? So what this tool tries to do, still needs a lot of work, let's call it proof of concept if you want. It's a tool that starts to, or tries to mix all these techniques together so that you just specify what you're looking for and the tool will figure out. The tool does, among the things that it does, it obtains domain names from search engines. It also, looks up different DNS resource records and essentially tries to output all the information that, that it gets. Just as an example, let's see where it is. Okay. Not here. Let's see if it was like this. So for example, if we run the tool like that, so I'm just saying, start at ripe.net and give me as much information as you can find, okay? So on one hand, it starts giving you domain names, and you will also see that the tool will give you IP addresses too, okay? That it learns in different ways. Now, if you just specify something like, something like this, you are not restricting the results to anything in particular. So you are just saying the H, it's supposed to stand for hint. So that means, well, it went out. It's supposed to be a hint that's where the tool starts working, but it can give you any results that it wants. So addresses and, for example, over here, you see that there are domain names that actually do not correspond to ripe.net, okay? The tool just started from the place where you told it to start, and you didn't, didn't restrict the results to anything in particular. Now, you could run the tool like this. This F stands for filter, meaning that now I'm telling the tool that I want to restrict the results to this specific domain name. Obviously, you could specify many things over there. So you could say, I only want results that correspond to this and that domain name. And you can also specify filters for the IP addresses. So for example, I only want addresses that belong to this or that specific prefix for whatever reason. It could be that, you are doing a pen test, and it's okay if you work with the prefix that, somebody give you permission to, but not to play with other prefixes, maybe, whatever. Here, I'm just restricting the results on a domain name basis, but you can also restrict the results on a prefix basis. So what you will see now is that when I previously run the tool, you'd get results in domain names that didn't end up with ripe.net. Now, the results that we're going to get now are only within ripe.net because we now restricted the results to be there. If you wonder, among the things that the tool does things like this. Let's say you obtain some domain name, this domain name here, okay? Once you get this domain name, the tool obtains the IPv6 address, okay? Some IPv6 address, let's say this one. Then it converts these addresses to a /64, so it considers that these addresses belong to some specific prefix. And then it does DNS reverse enumeration for that prefix. And of course, the tool internally avoids to do the same work more than once. So for example, if you get some specific some address here and the same address here, which belong to the same prefix, the first time that you discover an address within this prefix, the tool will do DNS reverse enumeration, and we'll see if it finds sites or not. But if it already did a search, for that address space, it's done. So it keeps a log, or let's say it keeps a record of the domain names that has evaluated and the address space that has evaluated. Eventually, if the results converge, like you don't get any new IP addresses or blocks, you don't get domain names, the tool just exits. So if it's keeping running, it's because it's already finding new stuff or new places of the address space or domain space to actually look for results. I don't remember if I think that I also included some filter. For example, if you just wanted the output of not just domain names or just addresses, but obviously with the keywords here, it's quite simple to grep for the output. Again, let's say the only special thing that the tool is doing is putting all of the techniques that we have seen together and avoiding, doing the duplicate stuff. If you you could probably get the same results by yourself, but the thing is, if you don't have a tool that, takes care of that, probably you are going to, search, well, that's where it ended. You're going to, search for the same things many times. I think I did, I don't remember, I think there was still some techniques that I needed to add, but, the idea is to try to incorporate everything that, the functionality of every tool that I have produced for, searching IP addresses or domain names within the tool so that it can be done automatically.